Hi, and welcome to Decoding AQ, helping you to learn the tools, mindsets, and actions to thrive in an ever-changing world. Hi, and welcome to our next episode of Decoding AQ. With me this afternoon, I have Colin Iles. He's from Cape Town in South Africa. He's currently in an airport in Joburg. And this is our first podcast interview with somebody in an airport. So welcome, Colin.
Hey, Ross, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. So a little bit of background on Colin. He is a curator of thought leadership events. In fact, he wants to help develop teams, their relationships, and effectively innovation and ideas. He's got a background in the finance industry, having started his career at Deutsche Bank, then Barclays, Standard Bank, and 5 years as the MD at the ABSA Group. But for the last 6 years, he's been the founder of his own business, Innovation Catalysts. And in fact, it was a similar time when we first met through Singularity University and A360 back in 2017. And what I liked about Colin when I first met him was the depth of his questions, of his conversations, had real meaning behind them. He's been a past deputy chair at the University of Cape Town, and this intersection between leadership, innovation, strategy is his happy place. And I know that you've just come back from the Middle East, running lots of events, roundtables, and helping with this leadership and innovation for institutions. Why don't we start off, Colin, with when you look ahead, we've got, say, about 6 months left of this year of 2023. What are you most excited about right now?
Lots of things. I mean, I'm very excited about what's happening in the Middle East. I think that, you've got to be living under a rock unless, you're not aware about the amount of investment that's coming out, particularly out of Saudi. They've kind of realized that the oil situation is going to be transformed over the next decade, next couple of decades. They've started to plow massive amounts of resources in to transform their own society, but they've got no choice. So that's opening up lots of really interesting opportunities, and it's also opening up transformation in how Saudis are working as a culture. So, for example, people I know that are out there have just seen complete transformation in the access to the workforce for women now driving out on the street. So it's got a long way to go for perhaps the minds of most Westerners. But in terms of the progress over the last 4 or 5 years, I mean, that's absolutely incredible. So that's the first thing. I think on the technology front, I think like everyone, we're going to be watching what's happening with artificial intelligence. I suppose the forecast that we've been lucky enough to be having a front row seat at with some of the community that we share with organizations like Singularity and the kind of people that you get to talk through that. We've been forecasting and having people forecast to us about how transformation is going to happen across a whole swathe of different technologies. It's nice now that this kind of AI revolution has landed with ChatGPT and other similar platforms, because it's suddenly real and it's got real interest, and if I think about the progress really since 2017, 18, where these large language models have been predominantly developed since those periods, it's absolutely incredible what we can think about coming over the next 12 and 24 months. So there's going to be organizations that adapt and thrive. There'll be those that don't and die, and there's going to be everything in between. We'll be learning what it means for our workforce. It's going to be fascinating to see how people transform. Is it going to be a job destroyer, a job creator? Is it going to enhance productivity? And that's going to be really interesting, particularly for employees and companies. Do we go from a situation where your best employees are 10 times better than the rest, and now it's 1,000 times better because they really know how to scale their own abilities through these types of technology? So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens there, and then I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with the negative side, where we've got kind of I guess what is it? It's not quite 6 months for the US elections coming through next year. What are going to be the big catastrophe events where these technologies have significant and demonstrable negative impacts? And a lot of people are punting that the US elections is the obvious place where it's going to be disruptive as people effectively create fake information, fake news, and it becomes incredibly difficult for people to actually determine what's right, what's wrong. And I don't think we have a society in that space. We're going to have to create one that's that well skilled anymore in terms of sitting back and being critical about the information to determine whether it's accurate or not. So there's so many exciting things coming on.
It's interesting you bring up the sort of light and dark sides here of any exponential technology in terms of their application to be used to augment good things and deal with some of the huge challenges, whether that's transitions of dependency on a past like oil in Saudi, climate change issues, workforce repositioning, to then thinking about how does this affect our societies politically? How do we deal with the just proliferation of information, the creation of that, and its realness or not, its fact checking, and where we were in some ways very much censored because we had a few channels of who would broadcast. They had a professionalism around their fact checking, and we could kind of trust some elements of those things, to now we can create anything that the brain imagines. And what are some of the dangers that you see that might be causing sleepless nights for leaders in organizations right now around some of these things? What's at the coalface, what's really happening of their feelings and thoughts around dealing with those challenges?
Yeah, I think I think it's slightly different between companies and societies. If I look at society and governments, well, let's just take a step, and it's the same for all. Storytelling is what is very much human about humans. It's the differentiator. Virtually everything that we do and how we interact with each other is based on a story. It's based on a lie. You know, if you think about it, money doesn't really exist. It's a ethereal thing that we've invented, the legal system that we've invented it. So yeah, the tables and shares which are labeled there, I think they're around. I think I am, and therefore I am. But when you think about the rest of the stuff, how we interact with each other, how governments are formed, how we go and set the rules and regulations, everything is a story. We've made it up. It doesn't exist. And yet, as a species, we're incredibly good with the right circumstances about following it. But the stories that we create to help us to follow it, and the information that we provide each other to get each other incentivized to follow up, are obviously based on words. There's nothing sitting behind us. So if we see disruption in that space, that could be quite that could be a catastrophe in terms of functioning as a society. Where I worry about, therefore, AI in that space is the fact that you can now go and manufacture stories from nothing in seconds. And you can now go and manufacture tools which will distribute those stories to millions and millions of people in seconds without any thought at all about the consequences. So we're heading down a direction where already for the last decade, we've seen a negative impact of social media, for example, where we're getting real tail risk because there are factions of people who've got quite extreme views who in the past used not to be able to have a voice or a platform, and therefore were in the minority because it got shut down just by fact people weren't listening, to a scenario now where basically that is the platform that gets you the loudest voice, that gets you the most number of followers, because you are fighting against the establishment and talking about stuff which just is categorically not true, but you're getting millions and millions of followers. Now you go and add on the ability to use AI to go and extrapolate those stories to amplify the message at scale across billions of people. It's quite right that we're worried about the implications of that. I think from a company perspective, it's perhaps slightly different. Obviously, it depends on the industry there. It's more about how you go and use technology for marketing and advertising. In some ways, I think it's really exciting because it gives them lots of opportunities to do it differently. I think in other ways, it's really boring because everyone's going to do it in exactly the same way, using third parties, using them to help amplify their message with AI. And when everyone's amplifying their message at the same time, I think they're going to drown each other out, and it's actually not going to be that big a thing anyway. Maybe we're lucky and we can go into Web 3.0 and have self-sovereign identity and encrypted Collins and Rosses where we can protect ourselves from this noise. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure how that's going to actually go and change. I think it's more interesting in the companies internally. Are you going to see companies taking really brave calls about either transforming their products and services because the market's changing, or changing how they go and manufacture them, because now you can use technology to go and automate at scale, and we're going to see huge displacements potentially in certain roles for the companies that are brave enough to go and do that. And I think that's where it's going to be really interesting. And of course, when we think, we'll come on to that in a bit, I guess, when you look at adaptability, you've also got to bear in mind, I think the large corporates, barring a few, are going to find it quite difficult because they're slow and they're kind of like glacial in their usual transformation. Whereas this is an opportune time for startups and small, medium enterprises to really grasp the opportunity that some of these technologies provide. So it's a sort of long answer, which probably can summarize as like everyone, I don't know. But I am slightly worried about the social aspects and I question what's going to happen in corporate, but something's going to happen. I mean, we can say that change is inevitable, and it's just going to be quick compared to what we've seen in decades gone.
I think one of the challenges is this sort of paradox between compliance and risk, very heavy in the industries that you've been involved in over many years in finance, of driving innovation, and that almost battle between those two things, that we innovate, that pushes the boundaries of compliance, risk and governance, and at the same time that needs evolving to allow for new technology. Similar is happening a lot in health tech as well, that we're having to evolve the way we apply governance and the way that we comply, let's say, to regulations of ethical considerations, that can almost stifle innovation. So I'm interested to dig a little bit deeper, if we can, Colin, into some of the examples and programs and bits that you're running of what you're actually seeing. So when you're working with leadership teams on trying to drive innovation inside institutions that often have this complex wrapper around them, how do they deal with those challenges? Do they skunk works it out? Do they just hope for the best, or are they stifled because of the environment that they sit in? What are some of the experiences you've found in that challenge?
Yeah, I think honestly, the vast majority of organizations are naturally stifled. They find themselves in situations where it's really, really difficult to get something done. If I use financial services as an example, they're in a situation where structurally it's difficult for them to do innovation. Let's talk about incremental innovation. Let's use a simple example. You want to go and improve your customer process when you're onboarding a client. So you could be a telco, a bank. Now you think about it, there are lots of different steps in that, because to go through that process, you've got to go and run lots of checks on the customer. Who are they? Where do they live? I don't know why they asked that question, but anyway, where do they live? Depending on what product or service, what kind of income, how creditworthy are they? What's their and depending on what they're trying to do, where did they get their source of funds? Where's their wealth come from? We want to avoid terrorist financing, anti-money laundering. So you've got lots of control questions. Very few, how can we help you be an awesome client questions. It's usually on the negative. We don't want to deal with you, particularly. Now that process could be done far more efficiently and more effectively. Once you've got them on board, and of course, you've got a new set of things. How do we engage with them over a lifetime where we just get in that right feel? We sense, we understand what they want, what they need, and we provide best value, best service, and in as automated a way as we can, so we can really reduce the costs and still personalize it. Obviously, this opens up with AI more than it ever has before. So companies sit there and they look at this question and they go, oh, how are we going to do this? Well, the first thing, we've got to go and get less data together. Well, that's a problem, because with 60 or 70 sources of internal data about a customer, and then a whole heap of stuff that's available on the web. Yeah, but we don't want to go on the web scraping bad. We don't want to go and do that. So we're going to just look at the stuff we have internally. We've already got a problem because it maps differently. They've got three names here. It's Colin William Iles, it's Colin Iles, and they're the same customer. Where's our identifier? We're using different identifiers. So they get really tied up on very basic data problems. Now you want to go and resolve it, but it's different teams. I'm sitting there in team A and team B. I'm front office, you're back office, you're support. You're in South Africa, I'm in Germany. We've got different rules and regulations in these markets. Even though, Colin, I'm operating in all of these jurisdictions, I am still the same person. I'm wearing different hats, but you can't see that because you don't share my data across each of your separate areas. And then I'm running companies as well. So how are you, what's my persona, the company? So it's a real problem for corporates. They tie themselves up in nuts just by understanding what I could do. Then they go and add a third level, which is something which I don't think people realize. You put hierarchies and structures in place because functionalization and scale is all about specialisms. The operations team, the front office team, the sales team, the coverage team. And you can end up with, the legal team, 30 or 40 different divisions who don't talk to each other, and they'll focus on their own silos. I've got my book of work here, and I've got my queue to cover, and the call center is only allowed to do these things. And now you put another overlay that says we're not giving anyone really significant ability to take decisions. It's too much risk. Now, I hope we're not boring people already. Once you're in that structure, it's impossible to innovate. It's just, I don't care what courses you go on. I don't really, you can do agile or lean. You can have all the most incredible ideas. It's impossible to innovate, because actually the only person that can give you the backing to do something that impacts all of those areas simultaneously is the CEO. And now you magnify that across many different innovation projects. the only companies I've seen that can sort out that internal innovation are the ones that say, let's set up a small team of people who roughly have the knowledge of all of those areas that I've described, and we give them live access to clients, live access to processes, and let them run their own little experiments. Very manual, lots of waste, lots of risk in proportion to their size. They make lots of errors. They can lose money for sure, but actually it's immaterial compared to the money you're losing by the inefficient scale and processes. So once you do that, whether it's a skunk externally or internally, you can make real progress. They can design incredible products and services. And if you free them from the shackles of technical debt and allow them to go and do the things that they want to do with the partners they want to partner with, and treat them with a different risk profile, a different perspective, you can do incredible things. How many companies do I see doing that? Very few. There's a few examples. I'd say I've seen, but you can count them on your hands, your fingertips. And normally they're not sustainable. Most companies find it difficult to do that a lot. So, and obviously I'm not talking about some of the kind of tech companies that have grown up with these types of models, Rams and so forth. These are traditional manufacturing, financial services, bread and butter, oil, taking stuff out of the ground, typical organizations. So it's really hard for them. So I'll pause there because otherwise it's that
endless innovator's dilemma, isn't it? Between you put those things around a company or organization to scale it and to mitigate risk. And then at some point, it becomes the barriers to the next phase of growth. And that's each of your horizons of innovation. And so that pocket that's out with a level of understanding and a level of autonomy that can create the next wave of disruption and that continual cycle of it, is that always going to be the same? And so do we need to reach a point? Is it Dunbar's number? What's the point that we go, okay, that's the ultimate level of scale now. And now we need to do another pocket, another piece in order to maintain that speed of innovation. And are you seeing even within those skunk works, challenges of speed of that, or is that still working? What's kind of really happening in the realities if you take a couple of the roundtables or clients that you're working with, where leadership probably know this, they know the challenges, they know the dangers, they know the obstacles of the structure, and they've hopefully got a few of these skunk works going on. What next? If those things are happening, is there a next, or is it just keep on doing that and you'll be okay? What's your thought?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is going back to the start of the question. How are people? What is the optimal level? I think the optimal level for most companies, especially, so the optimal level is 0 if you believe that the rate of change is 0, right? And the optimal level isn't particularly high for the amount of effort you put into change if you think it's relatively sedate and linear. So if we can predict in 4 or 5 years that things are going to progress relatively slowly, that's fine, because you can win on scale and margin and all those classical sort of things that you sorts of business skills. When you believe that the world is changing at an exponential rate, then all bets are off. So let's just think about two kind of things to get this home, I suppose. The first thing is, companies go out of business for one reason only in general, okay? But the major reason they go out of business is because the market moves. Simply, people do not want your products or services anymore. So if you want a UK example, you could look at Thomas Cook, from a year or two back. The market moved. No one wants to walk into a high street to go and go through the effort of finding an agent to help you to go and make your holiday with an all-in package and blah, blah, blah. You don't need it anymore because you can do it yourself. You sit at home online and you go onto booking.com, and then there's Uber for the transport to the airport, and then you can take a budget airline to get there, and there's plenty of sites which you can go on to get ideas about what you're going to do over there, and packages where you can go diving or whatever it is. So the market moves and you're out of business. The second thing I find interesting is that actually a colleague of mine did some analysis. I mean, you're like this piece. If you go and look at the valuation of companies, there's this huge part of the valuation, this intrinsic value, which can't be explained by predicted future cash flows, and the base data of that organization. It's massive. which is why, if you think about it, you can see so many loss-making organizations, whatever it might be, Twitter or Amazon for most of its life, and other examples, crazy valuations based on the future discounted projected cash flows, where the assumption is that innovation is going to create the profits over the next 5, 10, or 15 years. And the stories that those CEOs are telling to go and build up that hype, to go and support those valuations. And then every now and then the company actually, as it does it. So when I look at a lot of the companies, they're sitting there with the exact opposite, because they're sitting with CEOs that haven't thought about whether the world is going to be exponential. And they're not aware of the fact that a large proportion of their stock price, which they're meant to be being paid on for pushing up, and can be built on creating this market perception that you're doing incredibly innovative things, because that's what's going to drive your future value, not saving 17% on late returns like a Blockbuster, or improving margin, or wondering how many stores you should have as a Thomas Cook. And so it starts for me at the top. When you have a leadership team that fully understands that your share price is really critical in an industry where there is exponential change, if it has it in your particular industry, on stories and innovation to actually build up that share price, it changes everything. If you now add on the kind of the third part with that realization, how do you go and set strategies around it? Well, let's build purposeful organizations where whether you think it's for some altruistic good or not, you're focused at solving some sort of problem. You're not chasing the money anymore. You're going, I believe that if I can solve a problem at scale for my customer base in a new and novel way, which grows where the marginal cost will go down, if I can start having discussions around that, then you can start to go and set up all the things that you need to do it by changing from KPIs to OKRs, or going and sitting there and changing your innovation schemes, or giving people autonomy, or trying holacracy, or anything else that you can think of which gives you more fertile ground for innovation. But if you don't have those principles set at the top, is it exponential where things are going? I understand that stories and the share price can be influenced by showing innovation, therefore we're going to do it and building around purpose. I don't see many examples of organizations getting to your question about how many skunk works should we run, or how much should we invest in our innovation budgets. It just kind of becomes almost like CSI. We should do it because my mates are doing it, but it actually is not really a thing, and a bit of a bonus if it works. It's an add-on, not core.
So if innovation then is the new heart of organizations that exist and continue to exist in an exponential world, we've got some choices around it in terms of build, borrow, or buy. Right. So if we're building innovation, that investment in, training, mindset, environment, structure, processes, if we are borrowing it, so we look at, how do we integrate, how do we API, how do we hatch and curate other innovations to create a new niche in a new area for a new market delivery, would we go and buy? And we buy these acquisitions through, we see a lot of organizations now having venture arms, whether it's Notion or companies go, I need a venture arm to be able to invest in and buy and diversify my portfolio, even if my team can't do it and I can't move fast enough or train fast enough. I want a little bit of element of all of those other organizations, so it becomes distributed through venture investment. Do you see the best organizations looking at it in those three ways of strategy to drive innovation, between building it internally and having it, borrowing it through collections of APIs and strategic partnerships, and buying through venture departments and arms within there? Is there some examples where that's gone well or it's failed that perhaps you could share in any of those lines, or perhaps I've missed some that you can share as well, Colin?
Yeah, I think that all of those are very valid policies. I think the first rule of thumb is you're just got to try stuff. And I think in terms of your decision-making framework, a simple rule of thumb is, by doing this thing, is there a potential of making an exponential return by investment, a massive return on investment? And if the answer is kind of yes, it doesn't matter that the probability might be relatively low. If the answer is yes, then the second question is, can I do this relatively cheaply and quickly? What can I do to get up and running on this? And I think in a world where the future's uncertain, those type of bets, are good bets to go and take. When you're going to go look back at Microsoft, they've taken this bet for, buying OpenAI. What a bet. What an awesome project to go and invest in. it's a reasonable number they paid, but compared to the size, the scale, and the risk that was there if they didn't do that, it's a no-brainer. Yeah, just go and do it. We need to go and do this thing. The same as you could use, I suppose, Google with Android. It's a very small thing. We're not 100% sure what to do with this operating system. Let's take the bet. 50 million in a year where they're earning billions and billions. These are good examples. So on a portfolio basis, you need to be doing, I think, all of these things. Here in South Africa, we've got an insurance company that took a bet on buying a telematics company. Massively important for them, not just for their own products and services. They have a crash. Now there's an instant ambulance that comes out. Yes, I want to be with that insurance company because they've got that added. It's not just about insurance anymore. They're trying to help me survive when I'm having an accident. But actually, every insurance company wants that type of support or product. So they are making a huge amount of money from their investment in something which they took to support their own business, which they've been comfortable to go and share with their competitors so that they're actually going and getting win whatever happens. And I think that type of thinking is really, really important from CEOs, where you don't just, you do things even if you see that it might actually help your competitors because you're partnering with people that help you and you're getting, the double upside. Building things you have to do. I mean, you might not be succeeding on it, but if you don't, how do you build? You've got to go out and look and see what's going on out there. And I've seen examples of companies building interesting things. I think Standard Bank, a local company here with Shift, a really cool way to go and do your FX and to get your currency when you're going overseas. It's quite novel. Skunkworks up and running. It's now becoming so it's a good example of what the benefits you are, because it's now becoming a big part of their brand. It's something that they're quite successful around. Partnering, all of these things you have to do. I mean, they'll sit within this kind of corporate venturing. Now, when I go and compare it, if I look at Salesforce, I mean, they're doing great things in this space. Or you look at, it's not just the venture capital, it's Salesforce throughout, creating a platform of partners. Bring on DocuSign. When you're going to use Salesforce, you can use DocuSign. These type of partnerships, which leverage their ability to scale, because there's kind of 1 and 1 equals 3 scenarios, are just phenomenal. I suppose banks are trying to do that now, setting up platform as a service, bring on partners. We want to go and help you in some way, shape or form outside of traditional financial services products. Again, that's an example that Standard Bank are running. You see wonderful outputs from doing this. Now in Africa, what I will say, and in South Africa, when we look at corporate venturing, it's a nascent space. It's not actually happening. Most of the Fortune 500 companies are doing corporate venturing, and they're doing it at scale and in all of its things. It's not just about purchasing companies when they're small or doing M&A deals. They're providing on-ramps where, startup can't get access and distribution, but we've got it. You're competing slightly, but we're going to help you. We're going to bring you into the fold. Or acqui-hiring, where we don't really know how you fit in, but just listening to you teaches us something about where we could be going. It's interesting to bring your data science skills in, for example, to think about how to go and do X, Y, Z. And I think the companies that do that well, where they're really looking into the community and is getting as much input from as many different people from outside of their organization, whatever you call it, partnership, investment, collaboration, purchase, whatever, have huge advantages, because you don't come up with great ideas sitting talking to the people next to you, and you don't execute great projects with the people next to you. You've got to go outside your 4 walls of your room and your office block.
So if we have a listener who sees the same thing that you're talking about, Colin, that is in a role that wants to bring in other partnerships that they see and they're interested, they're curious, and they've found some interesting organizations that have an interesting idea, an interesting thought, and they want to present that into their mothership, into their company. What advice could you give them in the way in which they position that story internally, where they've said, I've seen what this company's doing. I think it'd be really good for us to listen to them, get involved. Maybe we can be, as you mentioned, a distribution partner, a way in which we can both grow together. How do they deal with that if it's not necessarily in their role description? It should be in everybody's role description, right? But if it's not, I'm not head of partnerships, I'm not that, but I'm, I might be a HR leader, might be a CHRO, and I see something and I want to bring that capability in. How do I tell that story? How do I position it? What would be some advice where you've worked with, diverse leadership teams to drive innovation, what's some of the angles they could approach, and how might they position that internally to get better adoption of these new ideas?
Yeah, so the first thing is actually is looking at themselves rather than what they do, because 90% of people are going to fail on the task that you've just presented, predominantly just because they're going to give up and they won't do it. So if you think, I mean, this is essentially a set. I mean, I just literally run a full day discussion with a group of people on this very point, and I think about it. You go, bringing any and presenting any new idea to anyone is essentially the same as a sales consultant. And if you want to do that well, at a personal level, you have got to genuinely believe in it. It has got to be a thing that you get out of bed every morning feeling completely motivated and completely believe in the benefits that this could bring. Because if you don't have that level and depth of belief behind what it is that you're trying to take to your organization, the antibodies that will kick you and push you back in every single scenario will defeat you. And you won't even get past the first hurdle. You'll go, you'll try, you'll fail, you'll stop. Right. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if you are that sort of person that has that belief, then you've got to realize that you are going to be taking some level of risk, because you're trying to bring something, and the risk is both reputational. If they'll think what you're bringing is absurd, which is quite possible if it's decent, because many of the best things are absurd when you first start the discussions. And if you then get it and it starts to get support and traction and you start to implement it and then it fails, you're going to be the throat to choke, the scapegoat on the back of it in most organizations. Not everyone has got a Astro teller willing to support those that try and fail, as long as they're doing the right thing with the right attitude in the right way. So you've got to be willing to take that risk. Go back to that first point where it comes down to your belief and passion, that you want to go and do it. If you've got that, then you can start to map it out like you would do for any sales process. And you imagine you're a startup wanting funding. You may as well look at it in that sense. How does a startup get funding? They have got to be able to tell an awesome story. If you can't tell an awesome story, which makes the little hairs, pop up on the potential investors' arms so that they fully understand it, they buy into it, they're not going to buy into your story about this innovation project internally in your organization. So you've got to craft a story which is just awesome. You've also got to look at the stakeholders and get a bit boring here, I suppose, do stakeholder mapping and think about how you're going to get in the time and into the faces of those different people and what format you're going to go and use over what period of time. Obviously, there's a lot of detail in that. If you're going to get it to emotionally resonate, you're going to get trust with those people. What is your stance in the company in terms of trust already? Can you walk into the CEO's office and just present it and you'll probably get some wiggle room? Okay, so you've got to think about those pieces. But when you do actually get the support, you're going to have to then give them this kind of feeling that, yes, they love it. Now we'll talk about the practical aspects. How is this going to impact your current workload? Can you do this in a risk-free way? What's my downside? What's the potential happening in 6 months? Does this align with what the shareholders? And obviously that just opens up a whole new front of people that you're going to have to go and get support from. So it is really kind of almost identical in some ways to the effort that a startup is going to have to go through to go and get funding.
And you can see why, when listening to you, Colin, that a lot of things just don't get done because it's hard, right?
It is hard. There is no question it's hard.
Really believe in it, and that was curious. I was interested in it, but I've got a ton of other stuff to do. It's a distraction. They'll never push it through. And if they get a little bit of pushback, as you mentioned, the antibodies coming in from the organization, they'll say, I'll go to a lower line of defense in whatever my project or work is. So it's really difficult then, if you're external, even if you're internal and believe in it, to get it pushed through. So is there merit in actually operating at a different level when you're got something really innovative and not going after the big ones with all of that structure, and maybe going after smaller medium-sized organizations that are easier to make decisions, don't have all of that structure behind it? Would that be where you would say go for the first beach landings in smaller size organizations to build up your strength, your stories, your pieces to go after the larger ones? If you were running a innovative adaptability platform, where would you advise our community of coaches, our community and network, to go after those corporate engagements? Where do you think the innovation opportunities are at. And as we close out, just to let you know, because I'd be fascinated, and I know our audience would be really interested in your insights of that. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I've got one other question that I need to ask you at the end. So that gives you a time frame for your thoughts, Colin.
Look, and obviously every circumstance is different, but I think about AQ, obviously, you know, in your minds, you need to map out that there's a certain target size. AQ as a framework for an organization isn't going to work if it's a single, or it will work, but in a different way. If I'm a sole trader, I learn it, it's something I apply to myself. If we're dealing with a company with, you know, 100,000 people, it's a very different format. If it's a, so obviously you go through those pieces. From a consultancy perspective, I think it's reasonably easy. Consultants are, because consultants are time and materials, and we survive building, you know, by selling to people that we have trust with. Building trust is what takes the inordinate amount of time, and it makes it very, very difficult if you don't have trust to sell anything into any organization. So as a starting point, like anything, you know, friends and family and people that you've worked with before are your ideal kind of starting points. If they're in large organizations in the right positions, you know, great. If they're in smaller organizations, great. The advantage of medium and smaller enterprises clearly is, in theory, their decision-making process is quicker. And I kind of like that because I worry about it less. I know I'm going to go to 100. If 99 say no, at least I can do it quickly. Okay. Whereas if I'm going to a larger organization, I can't do it quickly because there's so many people. I've got to go through a journey, and it's going to take time and effort. The weird thing is, in my experience, just as maybe to close out, we think that large organizations are going to end up generating us more revenue. My experience in consulting has been it's rather the reverse. I've actually found medium-sized, family-owned, and, you know, reasonably good organizations are willing. They pay market rate, and they want good service, whereas corporates are so used to having the bargaining power. Hey, we're a big corporate, we're awesome, you're pathetic and little, you're a nobody, therefore we're going to push you down. If you want to compete with the large brands like a Deloitte or what have you, you're going to have to come in cheap. And I sometimes find that you actually end up less when you do get the door open. And then with all the admin, it actually works out, just being from a time and cost opportunity cost basis, much better to go and deal with smaller organizations.
It's interesting. So my last question actually is something I ask every guest, and it's linked to adaptability and curiosity. And the question is, when was the last time you did something for the first time, and what was it?
Over the last couple of weeks, I've been doing quite a lot of things for the first time, I suppose. So the first thing I've done is I've been running interviews with senior thought leaders, which has been quite interesting. Because that means you go to these places, and this is a large multimedia firm, and you go in and they put lipstick and powder and paint on and scripts, and they're in a television studio and there's lights and entertainment and everything else, and you're just like, oh. So I'm quite enjoying that. Podcasts I started like you a little while back, which is for the first time I started writing for Forbs Africa, which was a really, you know, I got introduced to them and said, yeah, of course, actually that's a good one, that's a good first one. I don't think I can write particularly well, and I don't think I've got many interesting things to say. And anyway, I got the intro and it just popped out. I said, let me write a column, and they said yes. And so I started writing a column on leadership for Forbs Africa. I think I've done 4 now, so people could check it out and look for my name on it and see if they think I should stop. But my view to your question is, just try. If you're not trying new stuff, you're dying. So do try new stuff and take the risk. The worst that can happen is you fail, and that's actually quite good.
It's an interesting one, isn't it, Colin? Of, you know, until we go and give something a try, and our speed of failure and our speed of learning, what's the feedback loop of that first experiment, our first attempt at doing something that we can build from? And that's life. That is a life well lived, is to be able to go and do things and expand and have ideas alongside value where we know we can show up and give us some confidence because we've been there before. As we close out the final piece, how do people get in touch with you, Colin, if they're interested in your leadership and innovation for institutions, some of your keynotes, some of your content? What's the best way to get in touch with you, Colin?
Yeah, you look me up on LinkedIn or just go to my website, which is very strategically named as coliniles.com. And you probably won't find it because the spelling of my last name is absolutely atrocious. So give Ross a call.
We'll put it on the
bombard him with emails.
We'll put it on the chapter notes, and we'll do that. It's been a pleasure to reconnect. It's been too long since we last chewed the cud and had a conversation. I hope your flight back to Cape Town goes without a hitch, and I keep doing your writing. I love your LinkedIn newsletter, and I look forward to learning more and playing in this world of innovation together. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks, everyone.
Do you have the level of adaptability to survive and thrive the rapid changes ahead? Has your resilience got more comeback than a yo-yo? Do you have the ability to unlearn in order to reskill, upskill and break through? Find out today and uncover your adaptability profile and score, your AQ. Visit AQai.io to gain your personalised report across 15 scientifically validated dimensions of adaptability. For a limited time, enter code PODCAST65 for a complimentary AQ assessment. AQai, transforming the way people, teams and organisations navigate change. Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding AQ. Please make sure you subscribe on your favourite podcast directory, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a review and be sure to tune in next time for more insights from our amazing guests.